This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Upgrade your business with Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet. Shop Pay boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning fewer carts going abandoned and more sales going cha-ching. So if you're into growing your business, get a commerce platform that's ready to sell wherever your customers are. Visit shopify.com to upgrade your selling today.
Round the cauldron thrice we go, moving fast and moving slow. Potions bubble, candles burn, as the wheel begins to turn. Truth we seek and truth we know, embers of the fire glow. Spirit, join me in this space, join me in a warm embrace. Thank you for joining me for this episode of Round the Cauldron. I'm your host, Megan, here to shed light on life as a modern Wiccan. This podcast is produced every Monday to bring knowledge of Wicca to those who seek it. Find me on Facebook and Instagram at Round the Cauldron, on Twitter at Round the Cauldron without the D, and at my website, roundthecauldron.com, where you will also find show notes and links for each episode. If you like what you hear, feel free to leave me a review wherever you listen. You can also help support this podcast for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/roundthecauldron. All right, so this week we're going to be talking about the ThreeFold Law. Ooh, a law in Wicca? Who knew? The ThreeFold Law is something that can be a little touchy depending on who you talk to, and I have thoughts. I have thoughts about the ThreeFold Law and what it means and why I don't follow it. So, the ThreeFold Law basically says that whatever energy you put out into the universe will come back to you threefold. It'll be 3 times as strong. There's also some interpretations out there that say that it could mean that whatever you receive, you are bound to return threefold. And this comes from, or we think it comes from, Gerald Gardner's book, High Magic's Aid. And I have a quote here from that. It says, "Thou hast obeyed the law, but mark well, when thou receivest good, so equally art bound to return good threefold." So it could mean, one, that whatever you're doing, whatever energy you're putting out into the universe, good or bad, is going to come back to you 3 times as good or 3 times as bad. But it could also mean that whenever someone does something good for you, you are obligated to return that good threefold. And I have issues, but we'll get to that in a minute. There's not a lot of historical evidence necessarily to explain the ThreeFold Law. And what we've found, or what I have found in the research that I have done, is that it's mentioned in Gerald Gardner's book, High Magic's Aid, but it wasn't necessarily something that was taught in his teachings in his coven. So in some research, there's been some people who have found that it was essentially made popular by a Wiccan named Monique Wilson, and also through the publishing of Raymond Buckland's books. But we're pretty sure that it wasn't a core tenet of Wicca before then. And there's even some quotes and some interviews from Doreen Valiente that she goes into basically saying that Gardner made it up And I'll link to the interview in the show notes because I found it online. But I'm going to read some of it to you right now. Let me get that open. So it was an interview done, it looks like done in 1991, where it says Fireheart interviews Doreen Valiente. And it's this really, really long interview, but there's a part that I want to read to you. So in the interview, they're going through and they're talking about sometimes the best medicine tastes very bad, and Doreen Valiente's talking about how she was given like cod liver oil as a kid and it was all basically crap, and she said that it doesn't help her very much. And then Fireheart said maybe it's karma or the threefold return, and they're saying we'll give it to her one way or the other. Now I find what Doreen Valiente has to say very interesting, because she says, I don't believe this stuff about the threefold return. I've always been very skeptical about that, but I'm a lot more skeptical than I used to be. The older I get, the more skeptical I get. And then Fireheart asks her where she thinks the threefold idea came from. And her response was basically to say that Gardner was full of crap. She says, and I quote, I think old Gerald cooked it up in one of his rituals, and people took it terribly literally. Personally, I've always been skeptical about it, because it doesn't seem to me to make sense. I don't see why there has to be one special law of karma for witches and a different one for everybody else. I don't buy that. Now there's another quote from Doreen Valiente as well, from a speech that she gave at the National Conference of the Pagan Federation in 1977. She says, another teaching of Gerald's, which I have come to question, is the belief known popularly as the Law of Three. This tells us that whatever you send out in witchcraft, you get back threefold for good or ill. Well, I don't believe it. Why should we believe that there is a special law of karma that applies only to witches? For God's sake, do we really kid ourselves that we are that important? Yet I am told many people, especially in the United States, take this as an article of faith. I have never seen it in any of the old books of magic, and I think Gerald invented it. Let's let you process that there for a second. It really goes to show that, for one, we're not entirely sure where it came from, and for two, those Wiccans and witches that were following Gardner, and who knew Gardner and knew Doreen Valiente, would know their perspective, I guess you could say, because Doreen Valiente was a very very influential witch for her time, and for her to say that she's pretty sure that Gardner made it up is like, it's amazing to me that she would come out and say that, essentially. And I have to say that I agree with her. I have a lot of issues with the threefold law, and I personally don't follow it. I don't think that it's a law that Wiccans really need to pay much attention to, and I'm going to tell you why. So first of all, it's not possible. So even outside of Wicca, if the threefold law applies to all witchcraft, which is what I'm getting from what I've read from Gardner, that it applies to, not that I've read from Gardner, but in this research, that they were saying that it applies to all witchcraft. If you curse someone or hex them or whatever, and you do some sort of spell work because you're trying to seriously injure this person, right? and say like some asinine thing, like you want to kill this person. Okay? That's your prerogative, whatever. Um, if the threefold law were true, there's no way that that could essentially bounce back onto you 3 times if it's to be taken literally, because you're not going to be killed 3 times over for killing one person. And I know that's a really extreme example, but it seems to be one of the ones that get the point across. You can't do serious harm to one person and then have that energy come back onto you 3 times. There's only so much damage that can be done. So it doesn't make any sense in that aspect. Another thing that I really, really have an issue with regarding the threefold law is that if it's to be taken as it says, whatever you put out into the universe will come back to you 3 times. I know a lot of really great people who have been in really crappy situations. And these people are wonderful. They're nice, they're kind, they donate to charity, they volunteer, they do all these wonderful things, but that good energy, that goodness from the universe doesn't come back on them. They may find themselves homeless or going hungry or lose their job or lose a family member. And, bad things happen to the best of people. And it makes absolutely no sense to me to have something like the threefold law that says, oh, all you need to do is you need to be a good person and you need to do good and good will come to you. No, that's a load of crap. Bad things happen to good people all the time. And the opposite is true. I mean, fantastic things happen to the worst people. Sometimes the worst people have it better off than the people who do good their whole lives. And it doesn't make any sense at all. And I think it's also it can be victim blaming, because say, you're a good person, but then this really terrible thing happens to you and somebody said, oh, that's the threefold law, you must have done something really, really bad to have this bad thing happen to you. No, that's crap. That's complete crap. And even if you look at it the other way, where whatever you receive, you are bound to return threefold. The first thing that comes to my mind is, hello, rape culture. Someone pays you a compliment. Does that mean you have to be extra super nice to them, even if the person that paid you a compliment is super creepy and has, like, personal space issues? No. You don't have to put up with crap from crappy people. And I think the threefold law just sort of pushes everything back onto the practitioner. And I don't think that's right. There's another thing that it's sort of a working theory, I guess, in that this is just my opinion. I was just stewing over this episode trying to figure out how I was going to explain the threefold law and my problems with the threefold law without getting too ranty and doing so in a way that's going to make sense. And I came up with something about the stuff that you put out, the energy and the magic and the thoughts that you put out into the universe can have a threefold effect, but not necessarily in the way that we think. And I think it ties back to that number, that 3, because of Christianity and a lot of people coming into Wicca and coming into occultism and paganism from a Christian path, they sort of needed that Trinity, you know. Oh my gosh. What is it? The God and the Holy Ghost and, you know, the Trinity. I don't know why it's spacing me right now, but it is. But what I came up with is that everything that you do can affect you in 3 ways: mind, body, and spirit. And that's about as close to the threefold law as I think I would come. And let me explain what I mean by mind, body, and spirit. So the energy that you put out there, either through action or thought or inaction, first of all, has an effect on you as the practitioner, as the person projecting this energy into the universe. Depending on what it is, it's going to either affect your mind, your thought process, your body, depending on the action, and your spirit, depending on how it affects you spiritually. And then it goes on to have an action against the person or thing or whatever that you are taking this action against, and that's twofold. So you've got the first one is you and how it affects you. The second one is how it affects the other person or thing. And then the third one comes back to you, but in terms of your reaction to the person's reaction, I guess. I don't know if I'm explaining this very well at all. But that's about as far as I get with the threefold law. And it's something that I have a lot of issues with. And honestly, the threefold law reminds me of the law of attraction, which is something else that I kind of have problems with. Because despite popular belief, Wicca is not all love and light. You know, we're not all happy-go-lucky and let's put our good energy and good vibes out into the world and everything's going to be perfect. Most of us know that's not how the real world works. I mean, I consider myself a fairly good person, and I have found myself on hard times, and it's, you know, it's not always through fault of my own, but, you know, life happens, and to blame yourself for the bad things that happen to you is ridiculous. And I don't think it has a place in Wicca at all. I also think it's pretty crappy that it's sort of been presented as a law, because, you know, we have no governing body. We're not considered an organized religion. We don't really have a clergy, not unless you're part of a coven. There's no hierarchy. And it's just, it's not okay. And what I found too is that Doreen Valiente actually split from Gardner around 1960 because he had a habit of presenting his personal opinions as law. And so I don't know if this is coming across as like I don't want to say misogynistic, because in Gardner's time most of the practitioners in his coven were male. So if the threefold law were to apply to them, you know, it's not misogynistic. But the way that I interpret it, based on the things that I've read, and, you know, mind the threefold law ye should, 3 times bad and 3 times good, it's not applicable in our modern life, nor should it be, because it pushes the blame like I said earlier, it pushes the blame back onto the practitioner. No, kitty, you can't play with my microphone. Um, yeah, it pushes the blame back onto the practitioner for anything bad that happens in their life. And then it takes the the excitement away, I guess, of whenever good things happen, because then, you know, you can't take the credit for it because it's just the universe repaying you for the good that you've done in your life. And I don't think that's very good for morale, for one. It's not good for mental health, and it's really not good. It's really not good for us as a modern society to allow something like the threefold law to take such a strong hold in the Wiccan community and for people to just run with it, because it's not I feel like I'm just ranting now, but it's not good. I mean, maybe it had its place back in Gardner's time, because maybe back then people were a lot worse than they are now, which, given the state of our political system and our government in the United States, I don't see how that might be possible. But it could also have been a way for Gardner to try to control his coven and the people that he was bringing into the craft, to sort of get them to see that every action has a consequence. And if that's the case, I feel like there could have been a way better way for him to go about doing that. Um, Introducing something like the Law of Three, as it's often called. Maybe knowing that people would run with it and take it literally is just bad. It's bad, bad. Yeah. What do you think, Dixie? Huh? What do you think? Do you think we should listen to the threefold law? I don't. um, yeah, in a way, the threefold law is just crappy. Um, I have stronger words for this, but I try to keep this podcast PG-13, so I will keep those stronger words to myself. And just know that you don't need to take the threefold law literally. You don't even need to incorporate it into your practice. And I think that with the spread of the internet and the spread of all of the information that's available to the public, I think that just made it worse. It turned like a glowing ember into a humongous wildfire. Because a lot of people that are coming to Wicca and coming to paganism are coming from some sort of organized faith where there are a lot of rules and there is a lot of hierarchy. And I think part of the human condition is we search for the things that are familiar to us. And the threefold law is familiar to a lot of people, especially if they're coming from a Christian background. Not necessarily in the way of it being threefold, but just like even in the aspect of sin. So let's use Christianity as an example. People come into Wicca from a Christian background. They have their previous teachings of sin, and that if you don't repent for your sins and you don't do good, you're not going to get into heaven. And I think there's some newbie witches out there, some newbie Wiccans, who cling to that hierarchy and cling to that need for structure and the need for rules and the familiarity of it all. And the threefold law sort of it gives them that comfort, because it is something that they're used to. It's something that they've known for 5, 10, however many years. And I think we just sort of need to abandon the threefold law. And I might get crap for saying that, but I mean, if you really sit down and think about it, how does it make sense? How how does the threefold law make sense? And feel free to reach out to me through email or whatever and explain your stance to me. I mean, I'd love to hear it. I'm all for getting new ideas and differing opinions. I mean, it really makes me think. But as far as all of the research that I've done, I don't think the threefold law is something that should be kept within Wicca. Um, and especially if I think about it from maybe like a scientific standpoint. Oh goodness, what is it? It's that I think it's the physics law. I don't know. I was never good with science stuff. Um, that energy cannot be created or destroyed, simply transferred. Um, so if you're sending energy out into the universe and it's coming back to you, it's being transferred in the same form because it can't gain strength, I guess. I don't know. I think I'm just grasping for straws at this point to try to explain maybe how the threefold law could apply. I don't think it does, though. Yeah. I think this episode has just been a little rambly. I've been stewing on stewing on this episode for a little bit now. Because it's something that needs to be said. And I disagree wholeheartedly with the threefold law. And I've been a practicing Wiccan for more than 10 years. And I can say that when I first hopped into Wicca and I first started learning, coming from a Christian background, the threefold law and the Wiccan Rede are something that they gave me comfort. But the older I get and the more life experience I get, the more I see how 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 complicated life is. Life isn't black and white, and the universe doesn't always respond the way you want it to. And nothing is going to come back to you threefold like that. I think maybe it was just a reminder from Gardner that your actions have consequences, your inactions have consequences, your thoughts can have consequences. Now, they might not affect the people around you, but they affect you. Yeah. Yeah, I think this is just a really long, ranty episode about how crappy the threefold law is and why I don't follow it. And there's also been some talk, or some writing, essentially, about how the threefold law is just the Wiccan version of karma. But that's not necessarily true either, because there's some Wiccans that don't believe in reincarnation, and in Hinduism, where karma originates, karma is actually an aspect of reincarnation, and it influences the environment of our future lives. So with karma in Hinduism, the things you do in this life, good or bad, will not necessarily affect you in this life, but they will affect you in the next. So since some witches don't believe that our actions influence future lives, sometimes karma in Wicca is associated with the cause and effect. the cause and effect principle, but only in this life. So, and that's called retribution. And then there's a quote from Raymond Buckland's book Witchcraft from the Inside, which was published in 1971. It says, "It is a belief that each incarnation will be better than the previous one. There is only progression, no regression. Along with this belief goes another, in retribution in the present life. It is thought that whatever is done returns threefold. If good is done, then good will return threefold in the same life. But if evil is done, then that too will return threefold in this life." So, I mean, there's another example of the threefold law with really no context as to where it came from. It just says, it is thought that. Okay, well, who thought that? Why did they think that? Where did that come from? Did they pull it out of a hat? Or was it a divine intervention? I want to know these things. I want to be able to trace back to the primary source from where this came from. And I can't. And it just, this quote just proves to me even more that the threefold law has no place in my life, probably has no place in your life either, because if you're a decent person and crappy things are happening to you, it's not your fault, and it's not the universe's fault. It's life. It's just life. It just happens. So if you're someone who's been struggling with the idea of the threefold law, how it applies to you, why it applies to you, let me tell you to take the threefold law with a grain of salt, because not every bad thing that happens to you is your fault. Not every bad thing that happens to you is your fault. Remember that. And just do your best. Be the best person that you can be. Mind the Wiccan Rede, because, that's advice. That's not law, but it's good advice. And it makes sense. And just be the best person that you are capable of being in this lifetime. Until next time, guys. Bye. I hope you guys enjoyed this really ranty episode of Round the Cauldron. I'm sorry it was ranty, but I have strong opinions on the threefold law and the use of karma in Wicca. And sometimes it's difficult to speak about these things that I feel strongly about without getting emotional. Yeah, I hope you learned something. And if you didn't learn something, at least I hope that I made you think and made you question the things that you've been taught. Please consider supporting this podcast through Patreon at patreon.com/roundthecauldron. For questions, comments, concerns, or suggestions, feel free to reach out to me through Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or email at roundthecauldron@gmail.com. The music you hear in the introduction and the outro is called Night Owl by Broke for Free and is used under a Creative Commons attribution license.